The sound a silver fork makes when it's dropped on a marble floor is deceptively loud. In the hushed cathedral-like dining room of Aurelia, it was a gunshot. Every eye darted towards the source, the table of Victor Sterling, a man whose net worth was a rounding error away from the GDP of a small country. He stared not at the fork, but at the waitress bending to retrieve it. His voice, a low instrument of pure condescension, cut through the silence. "You people are all the same," he sneered loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Clumsy, inefficient, utterly replaceable." The waitress Annalise rose slowly, her face a mask of professional calm. But it was what he said next, a cruel Arabic phrase meant to mock his business partners in Dubai, that changed everything. He assumed she was just a girl in a cheap uniform. He was about to learn that some people hide entire worlds behind a simple name tag. The air in Aurelia wasn't merely conditioned, it was curated. It smelled of old money freesia and the faint, delicious char of a $300 steak. Crystal glasses so thin they seemed to hum with tension caught the light from recessed fixtures, scattering miniature rainbows across starched white tablecloths. This was the natural habitat of Victor Sterling, a titan of private equity, whose face was a familiar fixture on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. Tonight, however, his expression was one of profound, soul-crushing boredom. He swirled the deep crimson liquid in his glass, a 1989 Petrus he hadn't even looked at the price of, and stared across the table at Conrad Vance. Conrad, with his perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, was less a friend and more a high-functioning parasite. He thrived in Victor's orbit, echoing his opinions and basking in the reflected glow of his immense power. The problem, Conrad Victor began his voice, a low baritone that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised, is not the money. The money is easy. He took a slow sip of the wine. It's the pageantry, the endless mind-numbing dance we have to perform for Sheikh Khalid's consortium. Conrad nodded vigorously, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. Absolutely, Victor. The endless pleasantries. The pretense. It's exhausting. They want to talk about honor, about tradition. Victor continued a smirk playing on his lips. They want to quote poetry while we're trying to structure a 9-figure leveraged buyout. It's like trying to negotiate with a museum exhibit. Their waitress Annalise approached the table with the fluid, unobtrusive grace of someone who had perfected the art of being invisible. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with intelligent, observant eyes that seemed to take in everything without lingering. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, and her uniform was immaculate. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was the polar opposite of the lazy opulence surrounding her. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Victor didn't look at her. He waved a dismissive hand in her general direction. "It's fine. Just bring another bottle of this." He didn't specify what this was. He expected her to know. To him, she was part of the furniture, a functional component of the room. As Annalise retreated, Conrad leaned in conspiratorially. "So what's the sticking point with the sheikh? I heard there was a snag." It's a phrase Victor sighed, rubbing his temples. A concept. Allah Sala. They keep talking about it. Authenticity. Deep-rootedness. They're worried our Western approach lacks it. They feel we're just shallow. A flash in the pan. He scoffed. "I built a global empire from nothing, and they're worried about my authenticity." Annalise returned with the wine, presenting the bottle to Victor, as per protocol. Again he ignored her, his gaze fixed on the middle distance as he vented his frustrations. She performed the ritual with practiced hands, uncorking the bottle with a barely audible sigh of compressed air. As she began to pour, Victor's agitation finally boiled over. He gestured animatedly with his hand, knocking his heavy silver fork from the table. It clattered onto the floor with a sound that seemed to shatter the restaurant's reverent hush. Annalise froze for a fraction of a second before stooping to retrieve it. It was a simple accident, a common occurrence. But for Victor, it was the final straw, a physical manifestation of the inefficiency and grating reality of the world outside his own mind. As she rose, the fork held delicately in a napkin, his cold blue eyes finally locked onto hers. The disdain was palpable. "You people are all the same," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. The diners at the adjacent tables, a banking CEO and a retired senator, shifted uncomfortably. Clumsy, inefficient, utterly replaceable. Annalise's face remained impassive, a perfect mask of customer service neutrality, but a faint flush crept up her neck. She simply nodded and was about to turn away. But Victor wasn't finished. Emboldened by Conrad's snickering, he decided to perform for his audience of one. He leaned back, a cruel, mocking smile on his face, and spoke a short, guttural phrase in Arabic, a phrase he'd picked up from a translator, one he thought was a common dismissal. "It is over, maidservant girl." He mangled the pronunciation, his American accent butchering the delicate phonetics. He believed it meant something like, "The matter is finished, waitress girl," a final contemptuous flick of the wrist to dismiss the help and the entire frustrating situation with the sheikh. He smirked at Conrad, expecting him to be impressed by his worldly, if mocking, command of a foreign tongue. He turned his mocking gaze back to Annalise, expecting to see confusion, maybe fear. He expected her to scurry away, just another anonymous face he would forget by the time he signed the credit card slip. He did not expect the stillness that came over her. He did not expect the way her observant eyes suddenly sharpened, losing their deferential softness and gaining the hard, clear focus of a diamond. And he certainly did not expect her to respond. The silence that followed Victor's clumsy Arabic was different. It wasn't the polite quiet of a fine dining establishment anymore. It was a vacuum charged with unspoken tension. Conrad's sycophantic chuckle died in his throat. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Annalise stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds. In that brief eternity, a subtle transformation occurred. The deferential slump of her shoulders straightened into a posture of quiet command. The professional blandness in her eyes was replaced by a flash of something ancient and powerful, a mixture of indignation and profound weariness. She looked at Victor Sterling, not as a waitress looking at a customer, but as an equal assessing a profound and disappointing flaw. Then she spoke. Her voice was not the soft, service industry murmur from before. It was a clear, melodic alto, and the words that flowed from her were not in English. She spoke in perfect classical Arabic, the kind one might hear in a university lecture on poetry or a recitation of the Quran. The pronunciation was flawless, each consonant and vowel shaped with the effortless precision of a native speaker. "Arrogance is the curtain that covers the faults of the ignorant," she said, her tone level and cool, yet carrying a weight that resonated through the opulent room. Victor Sterling stared, his billion-dollar brain struggling to process the raw data. It was as if the marble statue in the foyer had suddenly begun to recite Shakespeare. The sounds were familiar, the language he had just been mocking, but the source was utterly impossible. This girl, this non-entity in a black apron, was speaking the language of his business partners with an elegance he had never heard even from the sheikh himself. Conrad's jaw had gone slack, his face a comical mask of disbelief. He looked from Annalise to Victor, and back again, as if searching for the hidden camera. Annalise held Victor's stunned gaze. Without breaking eye contact, she translated her words into crisp, unaccented English. "Arrogance is the curtain that covers the faults of the ignorant," she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion except a chilling clarity. "It is a proverb, perhaps one that would serve you better in your negotiations than the crude street phrases your translator has taught you." She didn't stop there. "The concept you are struggling with, Mr. Sterling," she continued, her Arabic now flowing, as she explained, then seamlessly translating for his benefit, "is not merely authenticity. To translate al-asala so literally is to miss the soul of the word. It speaks of heritage of honor earned over generations of a foundation so deep it cannot be shaken by the winds of temporary fortune. It is the difference between a palace built on sand and a fortress carved from a mountain." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the stunned silence. "You mock their poetry, but you fail to understand that for them, poetry is history. It is law. It is the purest expression of their values. You see it as a distraction from the deal. They see it as the very reason a deal is worth making at all. They are not testing your portfolio, Mr. Sterling. They are testing your substance. And from what I have seen tonight," she concluded, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout, "you are failing the test spectacularly." With that, she placed a new gleaming silver fork beside his plate with a steady hand. She gave a small correct nod, the very picture of professional decorum, and turned to walk away. The spell was broken. A low murmur rippled through the nearby tables. The senator was staring openly, his wine glass halfway to his lips. The banking CEO was whispering urgently to his wife. Victor Sterling, a man who could silence a boardroom with a single glance, was utterly, publicly, and profoundly speechless. He watched her retreat her straight back and measured steps a silent rebuke. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a mystery, a walking paradox that had just detonated his carefully ordered universe. His insult had been a pebble tossed into a pond. Her response was a tidal wave. "Victor, what the hell was that?" Conrad stammered, his face pale. Victor didn't answer. His mind was racing, replaying her words, the perfect accent, the confident cadence. It wasn't just that she spoke the language, it was that she understood it. She understood the nuance that was costing him millions, the very cultural chasm he was about to fall into. The humiliation was a hot, bitter taste in his mouth, but beneath it, a new and unfamiliar feeling was stirring, a spark of intense, undeniable curiosity. He threw his napkin onto the table, the gesture sharp and angry. "Get the check." He snapped at a passing busboy, his voice rough. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. As he strode towards the exit, he tossed his black American Express card onto the host stand. "Take care of the bill," he commanded the manager, Maria, who had rushed over with a worried expression. "And put a $10,000 tip on it for that. For table 12's waitress." Maria's eyes widened. "Sir, of course, but just do it." Victor cut her off, his mind elsewhere. The money was an afterthought, a clumsy, impulsive gesture. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reward. It was a desperate attempt to reassert control, to turn the inexplicable back into a simple transaction. But as he pushed through the heavy oak doors and into the cool New York night, he knew it wouldn't work. He had insulted a waitress, and in return she had held up a mirror, showing him a reflection he didn't recognize, and couldn't stand that of a shallow, ignorant fool. And he had no idea who she was. The name on her student ID and her employment records was Annalise Rossi. It was a simple, unassuming name that served as a perfect camouflage. It told no stories. It hinted at no ghosts. It was a quiet shield against a past that was anything but. After her shift at Aurelia, Annalise did not take a cab back to a trendy downtown apartment. She took the subway, the rattling, screeching 6 train, deep into a less fashionable part of the city. Her apartment was a small 3rd-floor walk-up in a pre-war building with creaking floors and a view of a brick wall. The space was Spartan but immaculate. Books were its main form of decoration, stacked high on shelves and in neat piles on the floor. They were books on art history, on architectural preservation, on post-colonial theory, and on a small dedicated shelf by her bed were worn leather-bound volumes of Arabic poetry. She changed out of her uniform, the starched black and white fabric, feeling like a costume she was desperate to shed. As the hot water of the shower washed away the smells of expensive food and even more expensive perfume, it failed to wash away the memory of Victor Sterling's face, the initial arrogance, the stunning shock, the final confused humiliation. She hadn't wanted to speak. For years she had cultivated anonymity. Annalise, the waitress. Annalise, the quiet student in the back of the lecture hall. She had buried the other Annalise, the one who grew up not in a quiet American suburb, but in the vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful turmoil of Beirut. Her father, Robert Rossi, had been a mid-level cultural attaché at the American embassy. He wasn't a spy or a high-powered diplomat, but a scholar, a lover of history who believed that understanding a nation's art was the key to understanding its soul. Her mother, a linguist, had shared his passion. They hadn't lived in the protected American compounds. They had chosen a beautiful old apartment in the Akrafir district, with a balcony that overlooked a courtyard filled with jasmine and the sounds of neighbors arguing, laughing, and living. For Annalise, Arabic was not a foreign language. It was the language of her childhood. It was the sing-song call of the street vendors, selling kark, the complex arguments about politics she'd overhear in cafes, and the lullabies her Lebanese nanny, Fatima, would sing to her. She was fluent before she was 10, slipping between English-French and the melodic Lebanese dialect with the ease of a fish in water. Her true teacher, however, was a man named Mr. Hassan, an elderly bookseller and a dear friend of her father's. His shop was a cave of wonders, smelling of aging paper leather and cardamom coffee. He didn't just teach her the language, he taught her its heart. He taught her the epic poems of Antara ibn Shaddad, the lyrical beauty of Al-Mutanabbi. He explained that a single Arabic word could contain a universe of meaning, a history of conquest, love, and loss. It was from him that she learned about al-asala, not as a business term, but as a pillar of character. It is the quality of the ancient oak, Annalise, he had told her, once his kind eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. Its roots are deep and unseen, but they are the source of its strength. Many new fast-growing trees may shoot up around it, but when the storm comes, only the oak remains. That idyllic, multicultural world had been shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. She was 14. She had been at Mr. Hassan's bookshop, arguing playfully over the correct interpretation of a Gibran poem. Her parents were supposed to pick her up. She heard the explosion from 3 blocks away, a deafening, world-ending roar that shook the very foundations of the old building. Dust and papers rained down from the shelves. Her parents' car and the market they were driving through had been the target of a car bomb intended for a politician who was visiting the area. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, a footnote in a conflict they had only sought to understand. Mr. Hassan had shielded her both physically and emotionally in the chaotic aftermath. He was the one who navigated the horrific bureaucracy, the one who sat with her in silence when words were useless. He made the arrangements to send her back to the States to live with an aunt she barely knew. The last time she saw him at the airport, he had pressed a small, worn book of poetry into her hand. "Do not let the ugliness of a few men poison the beauty of a whole people, a whole culture for you," he had whispered, his voice thick with grief. Remember the words. Remember the heart. It is a part of you now. And so she had fled. She had come to New York for college, seeking the ultimate anonymity of a megacity. She had buried her past, her grief, and her fluency in a language that was now inextricably linked to her greatest trauma. Speaking it felt like opening a wound. At Aurelia, she was just Anna Rossi, a waitress. No one asked questions. No one knew the ghost of Beirut that walked with her. Tonight, Victor Sterling, with his casual cruelty and his butcher's grasp of the language, had forced that ghost into the light. His arrogance hadn't just been an insult to her as a waitress. It had been a desecration of the memories she held so dear. It was an insult to her parents' love for the culture, an insult to Mr. Hassan's wisdom, an insult to the beautiful, complex world she had lost. Her response had been a reflex, an eruption of 14 years of suppressed identity. The words of the proverb, the explanation of Allah Saleh, had come not from her mind, but from her soul. She sat on the edge of her bed, the city lights painting patterns on her wall. The $10,000 tip was a meaningless, offensive gesture. He thought he could pay for his ignorance, quantify his humiliation, and move on. He didn't understand that the currency they had exchanged tonight wasn't money. It was truth. And for Annalise, the truth was a heavy, painful, and complicated burden. She had shocked the billionaire, yes. But in doing so, she had also shocked herself, reawakening a part of her she had tried so desperately to let die, and she was terrified of what would happen now that it was awake. Victor Sterling's penthouse on Central Park South was less a home and more a monument to his own success. It was a cavern of glass chrome and minimalist art with a view that could make emperors weep. But tonight, the glittering panorama of the city held no appeal. He paced the vast living room like a caged panther, a tumbler of Macallan 25, sweating in his hand. The encounter at Aurelia had done more than just embarrass him. It had fundamentally destabilized him. His world was built on a simple, brutal, binary assets and liabilities, predators and preymasters and servants. People were categorized, quantified, and leveraged. A waitress was a low-cost replaceable cog in the service machine. She was not supposed to have a voice, let alone one that could dismantle his entire worldview in 30 seconds. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The way her eyes had changed, the effortless, almost musical flow of her Arabic, the cool, cutting precision of her English. She hadn't been angry. She hadn't been emotional. She had been disappointed, as if he were a promising student who had failed a simple test. That condescension coming from her was 1,000 times more galling than any boardroom attack he had ever faced. "It's impossible," he muttered to the empty room. "It makes no sense." The next morning, the incident was still a raw, exposed nerve. He arrived at his office, a sterile, silent expanse on the 80th floor of a skyscraper he owned, in a foul mood. His executive assistant, Evelyn Reed, a woman in her 50s with nerves of steel and an unflappable demeanor, took one look at his face and knew to clear his schedule of anything non-essential. "Evelyn," he said, storming past her desk and into his office, "I need a name. A waitress at Aurelia. Table 12 last night. Dark hair, maybe 5'6". Young." Evelyn, accustomed to his eccentric and demanding requests, simply made a note on her tablet. Full background, she asked, her voice neutral. "Everything," Victor snapped. "Education, work history, where she was born, what she had for breakfast. I want to know who the hell she is." Of course, Mr. Sterling. Throughout the day, Victor was distracted. During a conference call about a multi-million-dollar acquisition in the tech sector, he found his mind drifting. The sterile business jargon of synergy and monetization sounded thin and pathetic compared to the rich, meaningful words the waitress had used. A fortress carved from a mountain. The imagery was powerful, memorable. It was also, he was beginning to realize, completely accurate. His deal with Sheikh Khalid's consortium was in genuine trouble. His team had hit a wall. The sheikh remained cordial, but distant, deflecting every concrete proposal with philosophical musings and vague statements about the importance of a shared vision. Victor had dismissed it as posturing. Now he saw it for what it was, a test of his substance. And he was failing. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn entered his office and placed a single file on his gleaming obsidian desk. "Annalise Rossi," she announced. Victor snatched the file. He flipped it open, hungry for the secret that would explain everything. He expected to find something extraordinary: the exiled daughter of a Saudi royal, a government agent, undercover a linguistic prodigy, hiding from a shadowy organization. The reality was infuriatingly normal. Annalise Rossi, age 22, born in Paterson, New Jersey, orphan. Legal guardian was a maternal aunt in Ohio. High school records were good, not exceptional. Currently a junior at New York University, majoring in art history. Her work history consisted of a series of mundane service jobs, barista bookstore clerk, and for the last 18 months, waitress at Aurelia. Her financial records showed a small student loan and a checking account, with a balance that was probably less than what he'd tipped her last night. There was no record of foreign travel, no family connections to the Middle East. Nothing. "This is it," Victor demanded, slamming the file down. "This is everything." "We ran a deep search," Mr. Sterling, Evelyn said calmly. "Social Security, academic records, digital footprint. She has a very minimal online presence. No social media. Her profile is remarkably clean. By all accounts, she is exactly what she appears to be, a college student working her way through school." Victor stared at the file, then out at the city below. It was impossible. A 22-year-old art history major from New Jersey did not speak flawless classical Arabic and quote ancient proverbs. She did not possess the poise to dress down a billionaire in his own playground. The report didn't solve the mystery, it deepened it. The girl in the file and the woman in the restaurant were two different people. "There's something else," Evelyn added, her tone shifting slightly. "The tip you left. $10,000. What about it?" She refused it. Victor's head snapped back towards her. "She what Maria, the manager at Aurelia, called this morning?" Ms. Rossi politely but firmly declined the tip. She asked that it be distributed among the entire kitchen and service staff. Maria said she was very clear she did not want the money. That single piece of information hit Victor harder than anything else. He understood money. Money was power. Money was leverage. Money was the language he spoke more fluently than English. For someone to refuse it, especially someone in her financial position, was an act of defiance so profound he could barely comprehend it. She wasn't just rejecting his money. She was rejecting his entire value system. He suddenly felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. The sheikh's deadline for a revised proposal was in 1 week. He was on the verge of losing a deal that would define his legacy, all because of a cultural nuance he couldn't grasp. And the one person who had demonstrated with breathtaking clarity a complete understanding of that nuance was a waitress who was a ghost, an enigma who had not only insulted his intelligence, but had also refused his power. The background check had failed. His money had failed. For the first time in his adult life, Victor Sterling felt utterly powerless, and he realized with a dawning sense of horror and fascination that if he wanted to solve this mystery and save his deal, he would have to do something he hadn't done in decades, approach someone not as a master, but as a supplicant. He would have to go back. The back alley behind Aurelia smelled of bleach, discarded lemon peels, and damp cardboard. It was a world away from the perfumed opulence of the dining room. This was the restaurant's engine room, a place of grit and function. And it was here that Victor Sterling chose to wait. He arrived at 4 p.m, just as the staff began to trickle in for the evening shift. He sat in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, the tinted windows obscuring him from view. He felt ridiculous like a stalker, but he couldn't bring himself to walk through the front doors again, not yet. He needed to meet her on neutral ground, or as close to it as he could manage. His own territory, the boardroom, the exclusive club was useless here. He had to enter hers. He saw her arrive. She was not wearing the severe black and white uniform. In jeans, a simple grey sweater, and with her dark hair down, she looked even younger. She carried a tote bag overflowing with books. She walked with a purposeful stride, her head down, lost in her own thoughts. She was just a girl on her way to work, and yet she held the key to $1 billion problem. Victor took a deep breath, straightened his custom-tailored suit jacket, and got out of the car. His driver, a stoic man named Thomas, watched him with a flicker of surprise. Victor Sterling did not do alleyways. "Annalise," he called out. His voice sounded too loud in the narrow space. She stopped and turned. There was no fear in her eyes, only a flicker of recognition, followed by a cool, weary resignation. It was as if she had been expecting him. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone perfectly level. She clutched her tote bag to her chest, a small defensive gesture. "I need to speak with you," he said, getting straight to the point. He was a man accustomed to efficiency. "I'm about to start my shift. This will only take a moment." He took a step closer, trying to use his physical presence to command the situation, a tactic that had always worked before. It didn't work now. She didn't flinch or look away. She simply weighted her gaze, steady and unnervingly direct. First he began, the words feeling clumsy and foreign in his mouth. "I want to apologize for my behavior the other night. It was unacceptable." It was the kind of apology one gives when advised by a lawyer, technically correct, but devoid of genuine remorse. Annalise gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Apology noted," she said, as if closing a transaction. The lack of an emotional response threw him off. He had expected anger or perhaps vindication. He received only polite indifference. He pressed on, moving to the real purpose of his visit. "I was impressed by your linguistic skills," he said, "and your understanding of a certain culture. It's a specialized knowledge set, a valuable one." "I read books, Mr. Sterling," she replied flatly. He ignored the subtle jab. "My company, Sterling Global, is in the final stages of a very important partnership with a consortium from Dubai. There are cultural sensitivities that need to be navigated. We require a consultant, someone with your expertise." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. He was a king descending from his castle to offer a commoner a place at court. The position would be temporary, of course, for the next week. Your sole focus would be advising me and my team, helping us bridge this cultural gap. Annalise remained silent, her expression unreadable. He took this as his cue to reveal the masterstroke. The compensation, he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, seductive tone, would be $250,000. For 1 week's work. He watched her face, expecting to see shock-elation greed. The sum was life-changing. It would pay off her student loans, cover her rent for a decade, buy her a life of ease she could likely only dream of. It was an offer no one in their right mind could possibly refuse. It was the ultimate solution, the application of overwhelming financial force to solve a human problem. Annalise looked at him, and for the first time, a genuine emotion showed on her face. It was not excitement. It was not gratitude. It was something that looked remarkably like pity. "No, thank you, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The two words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He blinked, certain he had misheard. I don't think you understand. I'm offering you $250,000. "I understand the amount perfectly," she replied, "and my answer is no." "Why?" The question burst out of him, a raw expression of his utter disbelief. "It's a week. It's more money than you'll make here in 10 years. It makes no sense to refuse." This was the moment she chose to dismantle him completely, not with proverbs, but with simple, unadorned truth. "You think this is a problem that money can solve?" she said, her voice losing its detached coolness and gaining a quiet intensity. "You think you can hire culture like you hire a caterer. You think you can buy respect and have it delivered to your office by Monday morning. You don't need a consultant, Mr. Sterling. You need a character transplant." She took a step closer, and her eyes, which he now saw were a deep, complex shade of brown, held his without wavering. "My knowledge of that language, of that culture, it isn't a specialized skill set I picked up in a seminar. It was my life. It was given to me by people with more honor and substance in their little finger than you can comprehend. It is not for sale." She adjusted the tote bag on her shoulder. "You insulted me. Not because you were rude to a waitress, but because you treated something beautiful and profound as if it were a joke. Then you tried to pay for that insult with a vulgar tip. Now you're trying to buy my soul to seal a business deal. The answer is no. It will always be no." She turned to leave her back straight, her head held high. "I rejected your tip for the same reason I am rejecting your offer," she said, over her shoulder, a final parting shot. "My self-respect is not on the market." She disappeared through the restaurant's back door, leaving Victor Sterling standing alone in the grimy alleyway. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He was surrounded by the scent of garbage, his $250,000 offer lying shattered at his feet. He had come to make an offer she couldn't refuse, and had instead received a refusal he couldn't comprehend. For the second time, Annalise Rossi had stripped him of his power, leaving him with nothing but the bitter truth of his own deficiencies. For the next 2 days, Victor Sterling was a ghost in his own life. He sat in meetings, stared at spreadsheets, and nodded at the appropriate times, but his mind was elsewhere. It was in a back alley, listening to a 22-year-old student talk about honor. Her refusal had been a cataclysm. It wasn't just that she had said no, it was how she had said it. She had diagnosed his failing with surgical precision. "You don't need a consultant, you need a character transplant." The words were branded onto his brain. He cancelled his afternoon meetings and did something he hadn't done since he was a university student himself. He went to a library. Not a private, members-only archive, but the grand public New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue. He felt conspicuous and out of place in his bespoke suit as he navigated the echoing halls filled with students and scholars. He didn't know where to start. He found the Middle Eastern Studies section and simply began to pull books from the shelves. He looked for the poets Mr. Hassan had taught Annalise about, Al-Mutanabbi Gibran. He found English translations and began to read. At first the words were just words, florid and archaic, but he forced himself to slow down to read them, not as data to be processed, but as ideas to be felt. He read about love, about loss, about the honor of a warrior, the wisdom of a king, the desolation of the desert. He began to see the faint outlines of the world Annalise had described, a world where a person's word was their bond, where heritage was a living thing, not just a historical footnote. He stumbled upon a passage explaining the concept of karam, a type of hospitality and generosity so profound it was considered a sacred duty. It wasn't about lavish spending. It was about opening one's home and heart even to a stranger without expectation of reward. It was about giving freely as a reflection of one's own character. He thought of his $10,000 tip. He had seen it as an act of largesse, a display of power. He now saw it for what it was, an empty transactional gesture. It had none of the soul of karam. It was the opposite of it. His research led him back to the word that had started it all, al-asala. He found a scholarly article that described it not just as authenticity, but as a nobility of origin. It implied a thing or a person that was pure original and deeply connected to its roots. The Sheikh's consortium wasn't looking for a partner with an old company. They were looking for a partner with an old soul, one whose foundations were built on something more than just the relentless pursuit of profit. He was beginning to understand, not just intellectually, but with a dawning, humbling clarity. He had spent his life building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. He knew he had one last chance. He went back to Aurelia. This time he didn't wait in the alley. He didn't come during her shift. He called the manager, Maria, and asked when Annalise would be arriving. He waited across the street in a small independent coffee shop. When he saw her walking down the street, books in hand, he went out to meet her on the public sidewalk. She saw him, and her face tightened. She looked wary, prepared for another battle. Ms. Rossi Victor said, his voice quiet. He kept a respectful distance. Annalise. Please don't walk away. Just give me 2 minutes of your time. Something in his tone must have been different. The arrogance was gone. The raw command had been replaced by a simple, direct plea. She stopped, but kept her arms crossed. I am not here to make you another offer, he said quickly. I'm here to admit that you were right, about everything. He looked down at his own expensive polished shoes, feeling a flush of genuine shame. I went to the library. I've been reading Al-Mutanabi, about Karam, about Asala. I know I've only scratched the surface, but I'm beginning to understand what I didn't see before. I didn't see the mountain. I only saw the sand. He looked up and met her eyes. You said my problem wasn't a lack of cultural knowledge, but a lack of respect. You were right. I was arrogant and ignorant. The two seemed to go together. Annalise's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She was listening. My deal with the sheikh is probably lost. He continued, a note of resignation in his voice. And maybe it should be. But I find myself wanting to understand for my own sake. Not for the money. I want to understand what you were talking about. The heart of the words. He took a risk, a leap of faith into this new, unfamiliar territory of humility. I am not asking you to be my consultant. I am asking you to be my teacher, if you have any time. An hour, I'll meet you wherever you say. A library, a coffee shop. No money will be exchanged. I just want to learn. Please. The word hung in the air between them. Please. It was a word Victor Sterling had likely not uttered with sincerity in 30 years. It was a word that conceded defeat and asked for grace. Annalise studied his face for a long time. She saw that the hard metallic shell of the billionaire had cracked. In its place was something more vulnerable, something genuinely searching. She thought of Mr. Hassan, of his belief in the power of words to bridge any divide. She thought of her parents, who had dedicated their lives to that same belief. "The Jefferson Market Library," she said, finally, her voice soft. "In Greenwich Village. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Don't be late." She turned and walked towards the restaurant without another word. Victor stood on the sidewalk, the city bustling around him, feeling a sense of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. He had lost control, forfeited his power, admitted his ignorance, and in doing so he had just won the most important negotiation of his life. The meeting room on the top floor of the Mandarin Oriental was a silent battleground. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat Victor Sterling and his team of sharp-suited lawyers and analysts. On the other sat Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil and his advisors. The air was thick with the polite, icy tension of a deal on the verge of collapse. In the week leading up to this final meeting, Victor had undergone a quiet transformation. He had met Annalise 3 times at the Jefferson Market Library. Their sessions were not business consultations. She brought no binders or PowerPoint presentations. Instead, she brought books of poetry. She did not teach him phrases to impress the sheikh. She taught him the stories behind the words. She explained the symbolism of the falcon representing nobility and vision. She told him the history behind the coffee ceremony, an intricate ritual of respect and hospitality. She read him the poetry of Rumi and Hafez, explaining how themes of honor, loyalty, and destiny were woven into the very fabric of the culture. "You cannot fake respect, Mr. Sterling," she had told him during their last meeting, looking at him over the rim of a teacup. "You can only earn it by showing you have made an effort to understand what the other person values." Now, sitting across from the Sheikh, Victor felt a strange sense of calm. The 9-figure sum at stake no longer seemed like the most important thing in the room. Sheikh Khalid was an imposing man with a quiet dignity that radiated power far more effectively than Victor's old methods of intimidation. He spoke in measured, thoughtful English. Mr. Sterling, the sheikh, began, his voice smooth as silk. "We have reviewed your revised financial proposal. It is adequate. However, my partners and I are still troubled. We feel there is a disconnect, a lack of what we call ala sala. We are building a legacy project, one for our children's children. We must be sure our partners are not merely chasing the wind of profit, but are building on rock." Victor's team tensed, ready to launch into a pre-rehearsed defense of their company's history and stability. But Victor held up a hand, silencing them. He looked directly at Sheikh Khalid. "Sheikh, may I be candid?" The sheikh inclined his head. "Candor is always welcome. It is the beginning of wisdom." A week ago, Victor said, his voice steady and sincere, "I would have answered your concern with a list of our assets and our market performance. I would have shown you charts and graphs to prove the solidity of our rock. And I would have been completely wrong." A murmur went through the sheikh's advisors. Victor continued, "I have spent my life believing that a foundation is made of numbers, of profit and loss. I did not understand that a true foundation, the kind you speak of, is made of values. I was blind to that, and I apologize for my blindness." He leaned forward slightly, not in aggression, but in earnestness. "There is a line from the poet Antara ibn Shaddad that I have been thinking about. I am a man whose honor is defended by my own sword, and I build my house at the peak of glory which no other can reach." He spoke the poet's name with a natural, unforced respect. Sheikh Khalid's eyebrows rose in surprise. "For years I believed my sword was my capital, and my house was my company," Victor explained. But I have come to learn that the poet was speaking of something else. He was speaking of character, of integrity. The sword is one's word. The house is one's reputation, built on a foundation of honor. My financial proposal is just paper shake. What I am offering you today is my word, my commitment to build a partnership based not just on profit, but on mutual respect and a shared vision for the legacy you wish to create. The room was utterly silent. Victor had not offered new numbers or contractual clauses. He had offered a confession and a promise. He had spoken the language of values, the language Annalise had taught him. Sheikh Khalid looked at Victor for a long, silent moment, his dark, intelligent eyes searching Victor's face. Then a slow smile spread across his lips. Antara ibn Shaddad, the sheikh said, a note of genuine warmth in his voice. A bold choice. A warrior's poet. It seems, Mr. Sterling, that you have done your homework after all. He turned to his lead advisor and spoke a few words in rapid Arabic. The advisor smiled and nodded. The sheikh turned back to Victor. We have a deal. The relief in the room was electric. Victor's team beamed, but Victor himself only felt a deep, quiet sense of gratitude. Later that evening, he did not go out to celebrate. He went to a small, unassuming address in a quiet neighborhood. It was the office of a non-profit that specialized in the preservation of cultural artifacts from conflict zones. Annalise was there volunteering. He had called ahead. She met him in the small, cluttered lobby filled with photographs of ancient sites. I heard the deal went through, she said, a small smile on her face. Congratulations. It wouldn't have without you, he said simply. Thank you, Annalise. You taught me something far more valuable than how to close a deal. He handed her a thick envelope. She stiffened immediately. Mr. Sterling, I told you, it's not for you, he said quickly. Not directly. Open it. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the contents. They were legal documents, the articles of incorporation for a new foundation. It was called the Rossi Foundation for Cultural Heritage. Its mission was to fund the identification, rescue, and preservation of art and artifacts from the Middle East, with an initial endowment from Sterling Global that was staggering. He had named her as the Foundation's unpaid permanent chairperson, should she choose to accept. Annalise stared at the documents, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at the name, her parents' name, and her eyes filled with tears. This wasn't a payment. This wasn't a tip. This was a gift of profound understanding. He had seen her, truly seen her, and understood what mattered to her. He was giving her a way to honor her parents, to reclaim the beautiful part of her past, and to build a future from it. You said a fortress is carved from a mountain, Victor said softly. This is me trying to quarry the first stone. She looked up at him, the wall between them finally completely gone. It was no longer a waitress and a billionaire. It was just two people who had, against all odds, found a common language. I accept, she whispered. And in that quiet office, surrounded by the ghosts of a beautiful distant past, they both began to build something new. The story of Victor and Annalise isn't just about a shocking twist in a restaurant. It's a powerful reminder that everyone we meet is living a life as vivid and complex as our own. A simple name tag, a uniform, or a job title can never tell the whole story. Beneath the surface, there are hidden depths, forgotten histories, and unexpected strengths. Victor's billions couldn't buy him the one thing he truly needed: respect. He had to earn it by shedding his arrogance and daring to learn. Annalise, hiding from her past, found the courage to reclaim it by speaking her truth. Their journey shows us that the most valuable connections are forged not through power or money, but through genuine human understanding. If this story moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who might need this message, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge our perspectives and touch the heart. Click that bell icon so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.